Okay, that's great. So our next step then is to go into recognizing what's the cost, right? So this is where, if you remember, I sent you those diagrams of common signs and symptoms on your phone there a while back.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you have those handy, or if you'd like me to just kind of read through them.
What was the first one you said, or the second?
Yeah, it was the common signs and symptoms, stress of a stress reaction.
One diagram of the power of the soul. Might be a nice video one. Okay, right. Common signs.
I'll just take a look too, and see if I can either resend it to you.
And is it I got one. Is it the common signs and signal of stress reaction or what?
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
You've got that one?
Yep.
Okay, so if you just go down that column, as we think about your mom, we think about, the, again, kind of where we're coming from, thinking back to that experience in your family, feeling the isolation in your room, and then the things that she's doing, right? Kind of the health issues that are kind of bringing that self-destructive behavior to her, right? Just to draw attention, as you mentioned, but the impact it had on you and your family, your brother, right, is that, this is very traumatic. And so then these signs and symptoms are what kind of tell you, what's still unresolved, right? Because that can take you back, like as you were mentioning when you were going through the letter to your dad, it was kind of taking you back to some other incidences. And that's where we talk about that's still some of the remnant or the cost of not solving it. So when you think about your current situation now, what signs and symptoms would you say remain? So as you just go down that list, I'll check them off here, but you state which ones do you currently feel that you're still experiencing now?
Like at this moment, or just kind of throughout my.
I'd say right now, present day, not necessarily at this moment, but when you think about mom and you think about the trauma and the multiple traumas you experienced with her, what are some of the signs and symptoms on this chart? So we got the physical first. As you read down that column, what symptoms would you attribute, to the best of your ability, to those experiences with mom? So they're present day.
Yeah, first one would be fatigue.
That's correct, yeah. Do you feel that? Just to be clear, is that one of the things that you want me to check?
Like I have like these days where, like when I have my headaches, where I feel fatigued.
Yeah.
And
so I'll check off headaches.
Okay. And I'll keep going through them if that's okay.
Okay.
Headaches. Weakness.
Okay.
That should be all from physical.
Okay, so cognitive.
Poor attention.
Yes.
Heightened or lower alertness.
Okay.
Memory problems.
Yes.
Poor problem solving.
Yes.
Distress drug, thinking,
Okay.
nightmares,
Okay.
that should be all from the cognitive,
Okay. Emotional.
anxiety, fear, uncertainty, feeling overwhelmed, intense anger, irritability,
Yes.
agitation.
Okay.
That should be all from emotional,
Okay.
behavioral would be change in activity, emotional outbursts,
Yes.
loss or increase of appetite,
Okay.
that should be all from behavioral. Sense of loss of meaning and purpose,
Okay.
I think that should be all.
Okay. Very good. So when I sum those up, you've got 3 physical symptoms, 6 cognitive symptoms, 7 emotional symptoms, 3 behavioral, and 1 spiritual. So that gives us 20 symptoms overall. And that is for us to see, this is the current cost that you continue to bear as a result of not resolving this with your mom. And so this is our motivation, but also our visual to see that there is an ongoing cost until we actually release these events. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so then our next step, if you remember, I'll just kind of repeat. So step number 1 is we identify, what event it is. We've talked already about the facts and situation. You've got a list of several prevailing thoughts there. And then your reaction we worked on last time, like what's your actions and behaviors growing up in your home. And now we're at step 3, which is the cost. So we know that this ongoing cost remains unless we're able to release it.
Yeah.
So any questions so far? Okay, so then the next step is, before we enter into the whole releasing component, we talked, step 4 was understanding what is it that we lose in these situations. So if we go back to your story, thinking about, the environment in your home, how your mom would act in certain ways, again, using these, medications or drugs or alcohol, and drawing attention to herself. And you mentioned a couple times where your brother had to actually take pills out of her mouth because she tried to overdose. And so all that self-destructive behavior also came at a high cost to you and your brother and others. And so therefore, now we know the cost, and this is still residue, right? So that's there. So the next thing we wanted to help you understand in the grieving process, and if you'll remember this from last time, is we lose our emotional needs, right? So that list of 10, which is, affection, attention, comfort, respect, support, security, respect, encouragement, availability. Those are the 10 things that we lost. And I think we effectively explained that last time. Would you say, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so now we know that. So then it comes down to, how do I understand this offense? So the offense that you were feeling was your mom made you feel unsafe. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's what the offense is, and we talked about forgiveness. Forgiveness is about releasing an offense, and you've already understood that it starts with you, and so then therefore what we did is we went through those 4 steps. So let's just go through those quickly, and just to make sure that you're still good with that. And so first step was, how do we get mom into quadrant 1, where, as we use our terminology, she's ineffective, unaware of what she's doing at the time of the incident, and that's step 1. And so can you see that clearly now, looking back, and now that you've been through the process once with your dad? Is that very clear to you now?
Yes.
Okay. And so what we talked about last time is, when we're in that spot, as we look historically from a faith perspective, as you shared about, that, Christ is dying on this cross, and what does he say? He says, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. And so in doing so, that's where we talked about, how do you get a person in that state? And it's all mostly based out of not having the skills or abilities, or having an environment where she was able to grow and understand proper, attachment and nurture, and that they were never trained. And so how can you expect them to be able to provide the same environment for you that they themselves never had? And so then that makes it easy for us, as we look at this now in that context, that she didn't really know what she's doing. Therefore, as we talked last time, we need to forgive her because of that, as that's God's the standard, and if he forgives her, then why shouldn't we? And that was that whole concept of understanding the power of the soul, if we remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see mom there in quadrant 1, and so when we do that, then we extend grace and mercy. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and so then step number 2, was where we talked about, looking in the mirror and saying, and we use that illustration of that story where Jesus again is in a place where he's in the courtyard, the Pharisees come along, and they, throw the woman who's caught in adultery at his feet. And of course they're trying to trick him, and they're trying to look for a reason, to kill him. And so they throw out the old law of Moses and say, hey, Jesus, this woman's caught in adultery. Moses said we should stone her. What do you have to say? And then, if you remember, he said to them, who is without sin, you can go ahead and cast the first stone. And so this is where you and I talked about looking in the mirror. Are we perfect? Can we throw a stone at your mom? And can we, be condemning in that aspect? And as you recall, during that moment, it was kind of an aha moment, and we realized that, yeah, actually we're not perfect, and no, I can't condemn her. She was doing the best that she could, and so therefore I'm going to drop the stone. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So you can see yourself going there.
I can. Yes.
Okay. And so then extending that grace and mercy again, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And every time we move kind of from right to left, we're again appealing to our mind and identifying our emotions. And I know that you felt that last time too, right? Is that you're starting to think different. And as a result of that, the empathy, the compassion starts to move towards them. And you can start to realize that people don't intend to hurt people. It's just that they don't know what they're doing, and therefore people get hurt. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So then, step number 3, we talked about the whole concept of time travel. And if Ernie could go back and, suddenly appear to your mom, even before she gets married, even before she has any children, and just suddenly appear and introduce ourselves. And I would say to her, hi, I'm Ernie, I'm from the future. I'm actually working with your son right now. She goes, I'm not even married. I don't have any kids. I said, yes, but as you know, you will. And let me show you kind of the videotape. And I was using that whole Charles Dickens example of the Christmas Carol where the three spirits are there, you know, and they basically take him back into his story, where you and I talked about the importance of every person's story, that there's blind spots and there's things that they just don't know, and we end up hurting people largely out of ignorance or lack of training or poor environment. And so if I could go back and suddenly appear to your mom and show her, you know, what her future looks like and some of the decisions she's going to make, and offer the same training that I'm offering to you, you know, you would see that for sure she would take that training, and it really reinforces the fact that she didn't know what she was doing in the first place. Does that make sense? Yeah. So then we extend grace and mercy again, and you can sense that and feel that?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay. And then if you remember, the last step that we had in the forgiveness process was just recognizing where your mom came from. And so when I went through that exercise with you on the dominant childhood feelings chart, and we kind of took a snapshot of what it was like for you, realizing that your mom's story was not any better, and that's exactly where she came from. And so then I think at that point you really connected with having kind of an aha moment, if I recall from last time, that wow, that makes total sense. Is that still, do you still feel that way?
Yeah.
Okay. So then that's where, you know, people don't try to create an environment where you feel isolated and unsafe, and often it's the absence of those emotional needs that really drive everything. It drives our sense of value, it drives our sense of self-worth. And as you mentioned earlier, when, you know, she was looking for attention, which just goes back and proves the point that she didn't get the emotional needs or the attachment growing up at all, did she?
No.
No. And so now when you kind of picture her looking back as this little girl, you know, just starving, you know, to get attention and wanting attention, but never getting it. And so she never really did develop mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually in a way that was healthy. And therefore, that's why she got addicted, because addiction, as we talked about last time, is, you know, most people that get into that position, it's largely because of the absence of not developing proper attachment or having the ability to self-soothe and nurture. So they just completely miss that component, and therefore they're kind of stuck at that earlier age in their life and never have developed it fully. And so that really answers the question that you had just about her wanting to draw attention to herself. It's kind of a dysfunctional way of getting attention, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you can just see with each of these steps as we move forward, you know, what really is at stake. And so if you remember last time when we talked about releasing an event, it's 100% about you. You know, it's not to do with mom per se, but then in you releasing it, these symptoms, these 20 symptoms that you've got, if you remember from when you worked with your dad's letter, how you had this sense of relief, and that those symptoms will dissipate over time because you're no longer holding the offense. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So do you feel like you're kind of at a state now where you could do the same exercise to kind of bring closure here, that you could write the letter to mom, and now that you've done it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's really good. Now, I sent you a video link too, right, to watch the how to write the letter?
Yes.
Okay. And did that help quite a bit?
Yes, it did. Kind of gave me an idea of how to go from one thought to feelings, right?
Yeah.
And I showed you how to write it. So.
Okay. That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to get it done here this week.
Yeah, and then what we'll do is we'll pick it up again next week. So I think next Wednesday is a holiday, but is Tuesday okay again for you next week?
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
10 o'clock again?
Yeah, let's make that work.
Okay. That's awesome. So do you have any questions at all before I let you go or close off? Do you feel like now that you're kind of a veteran at this, you've already done it a couple times, the one thing...
Just like the symptoms, like, do they just kind of go away over time after the release, or
That's correct.
Immediate, or...
Yeah, so as soon as you write the letter, there's a process that, as I mentioned to you last time, when you're writing the letter and you're going through those stages of grieving, so you've got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then I talked about acknowledgement, right? And then basically when you do the forgiveness leads to freedom, leads to peace. So going through those 4 steps, what happens is, and it's a process called bilateral stimulation. And so what it's doing is that when you actually are thinking through the process, so the left side of the brain, you're thinking through those stages, and you actually express the feelings every time, and then just going through the process of going left, right, left, right. If you remember, it kind of simulates rapid eye movement, which is really a phenomenal way of dealing with unresolved issues. That what it does is it actually clears the mind. So when traumas hit, it affects like the emotional part of the brain, which is the right side, and the body is in a state where it wants to constantly repair itself. So the mind is wanting to resolve it, but it will stay in that right hemisphere of the brain until you actually process it. So by doing what we've just gone through, these 5 steps, and then you actually writing the letter, is you're actually now engaging your logic, which is the solution component, and then you've got the emotional part, which is where you feel it and want to process it. It's just waiting there, and it's taking up space, and it's got the confusion. Hence we go back to the whole concept of the prevailing thought. Like the prevailing thought is where, if you remember, we talked about that being prison cell number 1. Well, that prevailing thought is sitting over in the right side brain waiting for processing. So when you write the letter, you're actually answering the prevailing thoughts. And so keep that list that you have, and then next week we'll actually, when we start out, we'll actually go through that list and say, okay, how many of these prevailing thoughts got answered? And you'll see that we've answered 80 to 90% of them just by going through these 5 steps. And then if there's anything unanswered, it's at that time that I'll answer those questions for you. So in essence, answering your question, the signs and symptoms start to fall away because you've released them from your mind. And when you write the letter, you're now processing it from both a logic and an emotional standpoint. And then in extending forgiveness, you're completing the spiritual component, which is really about the soul, right? So now we've got the mind, the emotions, and your free will all engaged. Whereas before, if you remember, they were out of alignment. Remember we talked about that?
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden, when you're in alignment, then you know the truth, and the truth sets you free, and then you're no longer captive. So then the letter is the final stage of processing, and then we prove it by doing another assessment. So then we look at it and say, okay, how are your symptoms now? Oh, well, they're gone. And that's what happens is over the course of the next week or so, when you write the letter, if I came back and asked you the same questions that we did today on the common signs and symptoms, your numbers are going to be way different. And then the other thing what we'll do is we'll do that global check set. If you remember, I did that with you last time. And so I'll maybe just I'll maybe just see how you do next week. I could actually take you through it again today just to show you how far you've come from last week if you want.
Well, yeah, if that's okay, we could do it next week.
Yeah, and then that'll really show you, because last time you're at 48.5, and if you remember, there's like 7 categories, you know, and you were high on, you know, 3 of them. And so, but that was prior to resolving any trauma. So now that we've worked with Dad, now we're working with Mom. It'll be a good thing for us next week to just answer those prevailing thoughts from this letter, and then go through the global check set again, and then it'll show you like literally the results. Like you'll see a, you know, dramatic improvement. And I know you've felt it. So, but it does show up. Same with symptoms. All of a sudden, from 20, you might go down to like 3 symptoms next week. You know, so I've seen that regularly. But that's what we can do next week. Does that sound good?
Yeah. If you're okay with it, I'll let you go here so I can go eat and go back to work.
Sounds good. Can I pray for you real quick, Abe? Heavenly Father, thank you for this privilege of being with Abe, and I thank you for his coachability and his desire to move forward. And Lord, I just pray again that you would bring to mind the things that he needs to say in this letter to his mom, and that the process would be just like last time, that he would be able to have clarity of mind and clarity of thought, and to be able to process all the way through. And so I just ask for your protection over him and his family, and just pray for freedom. And thank you, Lord, that you've provided a way for us to be able to release things that lead us to having an abundant life. So I pray that he has a great day, and we just look forward to next week together. For we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Abe.
Thank you very much.
Great job.
Have a good day.
You too. We'll talk to you next week. Okay, bye-bye.